Hey, what's up, tribe? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the TFC Audio Project Down Under. This week is all about walking. We delve into the evolutionary history of walking and how it sets us apart from other animals, the mechanics of how we learn and improve on efficiency and adaptability, the impressive benefits to our physical, mental, and social health, as well as some key tips to facilitate more walking in your life.
This week's episode is brought to you by TFC Events. We just wrapped up our Melbourne workshop over the weekend, and our next stop is Hobart, then Adelaide and Perth, starting at the end of May, that tour through to the middle of June. We'll be running events both on the Saturday and Sunday in each city. We'll have our feet balance and play workshop, but also launching our ground up seminar, which is a full day and full body experience covering the foundations of human movement and exploring physical connection through play. All of the details for those events are on our website, tfc-shopaus.com, where you can grab your tickets too.
Alright, so you're back with James and Mac after a little week interlude and a really amazing Melbourne trip.
Yeah, it was awesome. Getting away and meeting all our crew down south.
Yeah, it was a relatively short trip. It was only 4 or 5 days, but
we jammed a lot in.
Jeez, we did. Far out. So we sort of felt like we needed a bit of a break from all the socials, really, and just content creation ahead of such a busy couple of months. But yeah, in the Melbourne trip, we got in a few great podcasts with some footnotes down there, Andy, Mick, and Georgina.
Yeah, and they'll be great. They'll be really, just all interesting characters that people may have heard on Nick's podcast, but yeah, there'll be different aspects to their life that'll be unearthed, I suppose, through those chats as well. And
yeah, well, actually, Mick and George haven't been on.
It's just Andy.
Just Andy. It's been on Nick's, and yeah, they're really good conversations with all of them. Very different conversations, but you just find with footnotes you're always on such a similar wavelength, and I could have chatted with them all for hours and hours, but obviously had to. We'll do some part twos.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, you've met all of these people before, but I hadn't really met any of the footnerds, and I'm probably like a lot of people that listen to the podcast to know them from Instagram, but to meet all of these footnerds in person and get to see their lives and get a bit of a glimpse into who they are. It was really, really cool. They're
cool
exactly
people.
who I thought they'd be, I guess. Yeah. But fascinating. I mean, spending the time with Georgina and her family, and Andy and his pooches, and just seeing Mick's workspace, and it was a really cool experience.
Yeah, so we won't give too much away about all those because those podcasts will be rolling out over the next few weeks, along with some stories from yours truly, or Mac.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
yours truly, but
me truly.
Yes,
yours truly. So with the next podcast that we'll release, there'll be a bit of a video so that you not only hear from the person, but you get to see who they are and where they've come from. So yeah, that'll be a cool project to roll out over the next month.
Yeah, so that'll be hosted on Stories Told, which is Mac's storytelling business, and we'll also obviously share that across to the TFC platform. And yeah, so we'll release the podcast in the same week as we release that story. So that'll be great. And you're going to do that for more and more nerds over the coming weeks and months.
As soon as we can get overseas, I'm coming for you, Felix.
Oh.
I can't wait to get to Germany and just to meet. I mean, that's just one city in the world that had 3 incredible footnerds. So,
well, and there's still a few incredible footnerds down there that we haven't done.
Incredible.
So plenty of ammo.
Exactly. But today,
Today is going to be all about walking. So we wanted to do a podcast on walking because, I mean, it's obviously such a fundamental human movement that is very, very critical to our movement health and just our overall general health. And it doesn't really get anywhere near the amount of appreciation it deserves, I think.
It's probably the most underrated movement, really, given how much we do it. And
given how fundamental it is, everyone kind of just thinks, oh, walking is just walking, and our sort of work-focused, exercise-focused society is all about running and sprinting and weightlifting and cycling and all of this. But when it comes down to it, I mean, one of our first podcasts was on movement nutrition, and walking is kind of like
It's
your
staple,
foundational
isn't it?
nutrient, really. Like walking and squatting.
It's the water of...
the water, or like the essential fatty acids, you know,
Yeah.
the stuff that you just have to have in order for your body to function properly. And, you know, even though it's not this intense, flashy exercise, it's actually probably the most bang for your buck. You know, I guess it's the most beneficial movement with the least risk, really. And really, the vast majority of people can walk, and if they just walked more and more, like a lot more actually, then it would be very amazing for their health and their longevity and their quality of life. So
yeah, 100%. Longevity particularly, because it's something you don't want to lose, the ability to walk.
Oof. And yeah, actually, there's a quote. So I've been reading a couple of books on walking, one of which is In Praise of Walking by Shane O'Mara, and the other is Perfect Motion by Jono Lineen. And the first one by Shane O'Mara, he's a neuroscientist, so he comes at it from more of like that evolutionary, it's a bit more data driven and I guess a bit more sciencey, but very, very fascinating and well written. And the other one, Perfect Motion, is a bit more story based, but they both have their own. They're both really good books, and just talk about the exceptional importance of walking in our life in two different ways. So I highly recommend checking out those books. And today is going to be a little bit of a summary, or, you know, some of the main thoughts and concepts from those books, as well as just some of our own experience with walking. And if you want to go deeper into it, like obviously we're not going to be able to go very deep into the weeds, because you could with walking. Even something as, you know, quote unquote simple as walking, it's a deep topic. But we just want to touch on, you know, all of the main things, and then if you want to go deeper into it, then those books are a good place to start. And I guess on that note of appreciating walking, another reason why I wanted to do this podcast is because I've had a very interesting and challenging experience over the last few weeks of not being able to walk very well at all. You know, obviously, well, if you've been following along, a hop and a limp. But if you've been following along on the Instagram, or, you know, if actually for those who haven't, then I had an injury, a puncture wound injury to my foot while collecting firewood out at Bush 1, where I had shoes on, funnily enough, and I think having the shoes on gave me a bit of a false sense of security. They were disrupts, so very thin-soled, but I wasn't really properly looking where I was going, and I was holding a very big, heavy log. And next minute I step on a very sharp stick that just happened to be at the right angle, poking, and it goes straight through the sole of my shoe and about 2 centimeters into my foot.
The look on your face still haunts me. I was like, oh, something bad's happened. I don't know what it is yet, but it doesn't look good. And the yelp.
Primordial grunt. And yeah, so that was a really nasty injury. And I did post a video the other day on Instagram, just... it's called Foot Injury Update, if you want to go and look at it. It's on IGTV. But basically just saying how I haven't really experienced foot pain before in my life. You know, I've had plenty of other pain and injuries and issues, but my feet, you know, they've only really struggled with your classic stiffness that you get from wearing modern shoes, and not really proper pain.
Not anything debilitating.
Yeah, and so this was a really new experience for me, and very challenging, obviously, because my work kind of revolves around my feet. My work and my play revolves around my feet, and suddenly I couldn't use one of them. And it gave me a big appreciation for my usually fully functioning pair of feet, and how much they do and how much they carry me through my day. And also just a lot of empathy for people who do suffer with sort of persistent foot pain, because gee, I can't imagine having that for longer than a few weeks. I mean, it's been 3 and a bit weeks now, and I'm just at the point where I'm almost back to walking 100% normally. But up until then, it was either hopping, it was on crutches, and then it was hopping, and then it was extreme limping, and then it was not as extreme limping, and yeah, it's been tough, but, you know, grateful for it as a learning experience. And
I mean, walking in particular was probably the thing that you noticed it most with. I
Oh,
mean,
100%.
just getting from A to B.
Yeah, well, I mean, looking back at some of my injuries, like my knee pain and my shoulder pain, there were certain things that I couldn't do with both of those. Like I couldn't handstand and I couldn't weightlift with the shoulder pain, and I couldn't even squat or run with the knee pain, but I could always walk. And I actually found a lot of solace in that fact that I was like, well, I can always go for a long walk, and that wouldn't stir things up.
It was the exercise that you could get.
Yeah,
one of the only truly accessible ones that you could do.
Yeah,
movement wise. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, it's shined a light on how important this, I guess, message is of foot health, and because with most injuries, except for, I guess, feet and ankle injuries, then you can generally walk. But, if you've got a serious foot or ankle problem, I mean, obviously other issues, back pain and hip pain and knee pain can affect your ability to walk, but feet are sort of that most obvious thing, like you're going to be literally stepping on them. And so, yeah, with this puncture wound, I really couldn't put any weight in that area that had the puncture wound. I probably should have stayed off it more in the early stages, but
perhaps,
you live and learn. But yeah, long story short, I'm just got a big appreciation for walking, just being able to get around on your own 2 feet without pain, which is sort of where I'm just about to get to now in this process. So, yeah, check out those videos on Instagram if you do want more context, and I'll be tracking a few more updates over the next weeks and months with how it's going. But so far, so good, I suppose, or it's definitely trending in the right direction.
Touch wood.
Yeah. Touch wood, yeah.
Don't carry wood.
Yeah.
Well, look where you're going if you're carrying wood.
Yeah.
And touch wood.
Yes. Anyway, so we do obviously always like to start these podcasts with a bit of evolutionary context behind what we're talking about, because, we always say, it helps build our appreciation and understanding for the human body and I guess how we got to where we are now, and then that helps inform us about what we should be doing in our daily lives, because of the fact that we, in the last 100, 200, 300, 400 years, our genes or our bodies haven't really evolved that much, but our lifestyles and our environments have evolved a lot, and we're sort of struggling to keep up with that, and or struggling to, I guess, give our bodies what they need in the new lifestyle and environment. So when we're talking about walking or locomotion in general, so just movement in an environment, obviously movement is one of the key things that sets animals apart from most of the rest of the, most other organisms and species and everything. So obviously plants move, but it's from external factors only, whereas animals generate their own movement, and they need to generate their own movement in order to find food and escape predators, basically, at a very basic level, and reproduce. So they need to find mates and reproduce, whereas plants, their seeds get carried by the wind and so on and so forth. So animals, a big problem that we have is a movement problem and navigating an environment in order to find food, escape predators, and reproduce. So the genes for, interestingly, in this book, in Praise of Walking, he talks about how the genes for walking and locomotion actually probably developed deep in prehistory in the oceans. So there was, certain ocean-dwelling creatures that had similar reciprocal gait patterns as us, whether it was 4 legs or whatever, where they would crawl along the seafloor, and that was a way to, obviously, for them to get around. But what they've found is those genes are pretty much the same in those animals as they are in us, and like evolution doesn't really need to come up with new things. It just adapts to a new environment. Yeah, but it's basically the same genes.
The core's there.
We don't have to go too deep into that, but interesting little fun fact. But on a more specific to humans level, then the human bipedalism, where we walk on 2 legs and we stand upright, is actually a big part of what sets us apart from other animals, and especially our ape cousins. So obviously gorillas and chimpanzees and so on can go on two legs, but that's not their typical gait. And if they want to go fast, and they sort of knuckle walk or knuckle run, and they, it's sort of four limbs. And obviously most land dwelling mammals are on four limbs as well. Horses, dogs, you name it, mostly four limbs. And obviously there's birds that are on two legs, but that's a bit of a different thing. It's not like they're birds' main things, obviously, except for ostriches and emus. Birds' main thing is flying. But even compared against those ostriches and emus, then our upright spine is it's a very different setup. So whereas, you can imagine an emu with its long neck, and then its spine would then go down and then flatten out horizontally, parallel to the ground. Not completely parallel, but humans have this very unique, especially in the mammalian kingdom, I suppose, like the mammalian, I can't remember what they call class, especially in mammals. I should know that, but not off the top of my head. But especially in mammals, humans are really stand apart, and our transition from trees and four-legged walking to bipedalism actually allowed us to do a number of different things. So first of all, it was a much more efficient walk, or a much more efficient gait pattern, which means we could cover more ground with less energy, and that facilitated migration. So if we needed to get to a new environment, or just basically walking out of Africa, there's a whole chapter in that book called Walking Out of Africa, where we could actually cover that ground. And it also facilitated hunting. So having hands free while being standing upright allowed us to use technology and tools and weapons whilst still moving, or so whether we're hunting an animal, whether it's walking or running, then being bipedal on two legs allowed us that freedom. Whereas obviously that other animals don't have that freedom, and they have their own weapons like teeth and claws and stuff. But the other part of that is the upright nature of bipedalism, or our bipedalism. The upright nature allowed us to have a lot more face-to-face contact and social connections. And while walking is quite a social thing, and you'd be walking somewhere with someone, whether it's foraging, or hunting, then you actually had a lot more awareness about what was going on in your environment. And, more ability to sort of look around you quickly and look at other faces and just understand what was going on. And that helped us work together in terms of finding food, and also building shelters, and, being able to carry wood or carry infants. It allowed a lot of that
advancement, really.
That advancement that only humans made along that path. So, there's a number of things that set us apart as humans, like opposable thumbs don't completely set us apart, but the combination of opposable thumbs, bigger brains, obviously, and our ability to walk upright bipedally has really helped us in our development, for better or for worse. Again, the planet isn't really thriving with a huge amount of humans on it at the moment, but it is cool to have that appreciation for where we've come from, and to acknowledge walking as a key part of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Another thing that's important we'll just get into the mechanics of walking now. And it's important to acknowledge that walking is actually a very complex skill that is really, like we said, it's taken for granted. And that's because we learn it very early, and we never really have to relearn it unless we have some kind of injury or brain injury. And I have worked with on physio placements, I've worked with people who've had strokes and completely lost their ability to walk because one side of their body no longer works. And it's really hard.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously in cases of a brain injury, obviously that's going to be a difficult process, because areas of the brain are no longer functioning, and you have to have all of this adaptive processes for the brain to relearn how to use those muscles.
Is a lot of it just reps? Like, is a lot of it just repetition? Or
not quite. interesting, especially in that brain injury context. Then we had to do a lot of isolated strengthening because, and we'll get into this a little bit as we talk through the mechanics, but when you have a stroke, certain types of strokes, especially in the motor cortex, then your nervous, like your connection between your nervous system and those muscles kind of dies basically, or it gets majorly disrupted. And so you don't actually have, say to push forward, you need hip extension. But for that, you need some level of glute activation. And now you don't have any glute activation. And so we actually had to teach this person how to activate their glutes, or just reps of activating glutes, and then reps of activating quads. And then
so it's putting all of the pieces of the puzzle back together so that it can start working together again.
Yeah. So it's a very slow process, but at the same time, it is a very slow process when we are kids as well. When we're babies and developing, it's maybe not quite as slow because all of our systems are set up to get there and they're not injured. But, a baby doesn't just come out of the womb ready to go. It's a tough process. It's thousands and thousands of reps and a lot of falls, which fortunately doesn't matter as much when we're young because we've got less distance to fall and we're less likely to injure ourselves. And it does matter a lot when we're old if we lose the ability to walk, because a fall really, really matters and can be life-threatening. But it's not like, it is inherent in the sense that all of the systems are there to get going, but the environment sort of has to facilitate it, I suppose. And it does help a lot if kids see people walking around a lot, because they go, oh, well, I want to do that, or I want to. They want that sense of independence, and this is what we talked about in that play podcast. Is no one's coaching a kid how to walk, and even if someone was, it probably wouldn't be helping that much. It'd probably just be confusing him. It's literally just,
it has to want to do it.
It has to see people walking and go, okay, I want to do that. Or there needs to be things in their environment that they want to go to. And then they figure out they're a problem solving machine. They figure out, okay, well, how do I get there? First it's rolling, then it's crawling, then it's, shuffling, then crawling, then
finding the most efficient way to do it.
Yeah. And walking is just the most efficient once you can build the patterns. And interesting thing on that as well is that robotic engineers and everything haven't got anywhere near close to creating an efficient walking robot. They've got I've seen these like dog looking things. That actually,
I think it's a place in Boston that's incredible. Like incredible that a robot is able to do what it's doing, but you're right. It doesn't quite come close to the real thing.
And that's four-legged locomotion. So they're definitely nowhere near close getting anything like human locomotion, two-legged locomotion, because there is so much that goes into the walking pattern. So first of all, you need enough stability, so balance, and we've talked about the balance system in depth in a previous podcast, which would be, I highly recommend listening to. But just the stability of standing up on two legs, and that's something that kids need to learn painstakingly, gradually, slowly learn how to stand up with many falls. And then once you've got the ability to stand on two legs, in order to walk, you need the ability to stand on one leg. And this is a big reason why we're so big on doing a lot of balance work and beam work and training your hip stability, because if you don't have good hip stability, then it's going to affect pretty much everything you do on one leg, which is walking and running, which are two of the most common patterns that we would need to do. So there's that aspect, the actual hip stability and overall general balance. Then there's the mobility requirements of your hips. So hip flexion and extension are obviously the main movements of the hip, so going forward and going backwards. The ankle dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, and big toe extension, and then obviously big toe flexion to push off. So it's kind of hard to explain the mechanics of walking in a podcast.
Yeah, of course.
It's not very... audio isn't the best medium for that, but you can get the idea that there's all of these areas of your body that are working together in tandem, in sync, in synchronicity, to create this pattern that then
is fluid.
Like it's it's a lot of different movements going on at the same time, like in different phases of gait. So there's stance phase. So you're in stance phase on one leg and you're in swing phase on the other leg, and both legs are doing essentially different things at the same time, and then they swap, and then they swap, and then they swap. And so first of all, you need the actual mobility of those joints, and that's something that is very lacking today because of chairs and shoes, mostly because chairs take away your hip extension. Well, they don't take it away, but a long time spent sitting in chairs reduces your hip extension, which is very important for push-off and propulsion. And likewise, shoes and just sedentarism in general and lack of squatting reduces your ankle dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, or just ankle range of motion in general, and your big toe range of motion. And then that affects your ability to push off as well. And so if you don't have the sort of prerequisite, quote unquote, prerequisite mobility, then your walking won't be as efficient.
And that's, I guess, why we see when people do transition to barefoot shoes or walking barefoot and taking off those limiting shoes, why they do find such an impact initially. For people who've been walking in, or wearing shoes all their lives, tighter calves, and you notice it pretty rapidly because of the limiting factors of what you've been wearing.
Yeah, your body's used to one environment and suddenly you give it another environment. And for some people, they adapt really well. And for some people, it's too much load and they have to go more gradually. But I guess giving your body the most natural environment that it can get is always going to be, or at least working towards that, is always going to be the best thing in terms of efficiency. And that goes for walking and running and squatting and so on. All natural human movements. So yeah, there's all of these areas of the body that are working together in tandem and in sync to create this pattern. And the cool part is, and I always love to give appreciation for the body, is we don't think about it. Because it's hard to learn as a kid, and you're constantly just trying. As soon as you can do it, then you're just trying, and you are, I guess, quote unquote, thinking about it. Obviously, we have no memory of what we're thinking about, but we're focusing on learning this pattern. And then once you've got it, you've got it.
It's funny that, isn't it? We do place, parents place so much weight on those first steps, and it's an incredible moment. No doubt about it. But then once it's done, it's like, okay, he's walking.
What's next?
Yeah, exactly. and we probably lose touch with how special and incredible and amazing that is.
Yes.
From that moment forward.
Yeah.
Individually, like personally, or from witnessing your own child take their first steps.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I guess you lose touch with that appreciation until you lose your ability to walk.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh yeah, that's right. Walking's amazing. And it's so important. But that is such a milestone for kids, because walking gives a level of independence that almost nothing else does, I think. Because you're actually able to get from A to B efficiently by yourself. And that can be a nightmare, obviously, for parents, because now they're having to watch where their kid's going all the time. But it is a huge, huge milestone and should be appreciated at the time, and should be continued to be appreciated as well.
Exactly, yeah.
But the interesting thing is, like I said, you don't think about it anymore. And what happens here is with rhythmic movements of the body, like stereotypical rhythmic repetitive movements, we have these things called central pattern generators in the spinal cord. And this is where your brain essentially becomes the analogy is like your brain becomes the keys that start the engine, and then the spinal cord kind of drives the car. So the brain goes, okay, I want to walk. And then it goes, sweet, start the pattern for walking. And then your spinal cord does your rhythmic back and forth motion to get walking. And then your brain goes, okay, I don't want to walk anymore. And then that stops. And the same thing is, it's similar with breathing. Obviously, you don't have to think about breathing. And once you learn to swim and run and those kinds, or cycle, it's just rhythmic patterns that just go over and over and over again. And so I think that's a pretty cool part of the brain, and that is why we are also, I guess, unconscious or most of us, most people are unconscious of how cool walking is because it is just plug in and go. It's like a self-driving car almost.
Yeah. Very automated.
But yeah, it's a very cool part of it. So central pattern generators, and they generate this reciprocal pattern, which is basically opposite hand, opposite leg. So you'll notice when you walk, your right hand goes forward with your left leg, and then they both go back as your right leg and left hand go forward. And then that repeats over and over and over again. And so that gives you balance, and it helps with balance and stability and with momentum as well, because, you can go try for yourself. Try going right leg and right hand together and left hand and left leg together, and see how far you get and how easy it is. It's not very fun. Well, actually, it could be fun, but it's not very efficient. And then lastly, in terms of mechanics of walking, it's just about adaptability. So we've talked about on the podcast before about how in modern society, we are generally only exposed to flat, level ground. And this is very unnatural for us. Not that we would never be exposed to flat, level ground, but in large part, historically, humans would be exposed to a huge amount of varying terrain. Rocks, logs, trees, roots, you name it, streams, just a lot of hills, a lot of different varying terrain that really challenges the mobility and the adaptability of the feet and the ankles. So the foot-ankle complex works together to send a lot of information to the brain about what's happening at the ground. And then our brain can then use that information to create appropriate outputs, so to change our movement behaviors to adapt to the ground. And so what we don't get in today's society is all of those natural movements that happen at the foot and the ankle and the hip, and all those natural movements throughout the body that are a result of those varying terrains. So I just wanted to bring that up as an issue, because our walking is supposed to be adaptable, even though it's a central pattern generator. That central pattern can keep going while you're still adapting to it based on different, based on input from your feet and from your eyes and from your ears and all of these things. It is made to be adaptable, and on that note, we should be exposing it to environments that encourage that challenge and that adaptation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can pretty much go anywhere without having to even go up a set of stairs these days.
Yeah.
And let alone a hill.
Yeah, exactly. So you really have to seek those things out, and going barefoot, or at least in barefoot shoes, with that have minimal disruption to the natural foot function, is very important for getting the most out of those walks.
Because I mean, it's not even big hills we're talking about. It's even subtle changes in the ground, and on rocks and gravel, and all of these different things that promote that. It's not hiking up a mountain.
Yeah, exactly. It's these little nutrients, these little movement nutrients for the feet, and these textures that actually make a big difference to how nutritious, quote unquote, the whole walk is. So yeah, we're adaptable. We need to be exposed to challenge in order to adapt. So make sure you're challenging your walking. And obviously it needs to be gradual. You don't want to go out and do a 5K barefoot hike first thing. Like we always talk about, it's just gradually exposing yourself to more and more challenges.
And I think that was probably personally one of the biggest, I don't know how I'd say it, but when I started living with you and was exposed to the barefoot lifestyle, and that was sort of the drip feed for me, was, that was the first baby steps I started taking on this whole barefoot journey. And it was just morning walks. Our daily walks by the river. It's only half an hour, 40 minutes. But, that was enough for me to catch the bug, and gradually, you long for it. You want to get out for that walk and to expose yourself to textures. It was funny at the beginning, we'd walk we walk along cement and along a manicured path, but as you got used to the walk, there are certain parts of that walk that you'd look forward to, whether it was the metal grates that were over the sewers, or
a little spiky bit.
Yeah, all of these little different textures that you looked forward to, and at first. And I remember, when we've gone on barefoot walks with other people and they've walked across those surfaces and they shriek at walking along these spiky,
Ooh, that's spiky.
It's like a Shakti mat, but outdoors. And it's interesting how that just builds up over time.
Yeah, until your feet start craving it.
Yeah.
And likewise, your feet start craving that, and your body and mind just starts craving the feeling of walking as well. And I mean, that's something that we're about to talk about, actually, is, I guess, the benefits on the body and mind. But you never regret going for a walk.
No.
Just
it's that simple.
There might be times where you're like, oh, I don't feel like going out, or I'm just feeling really lazy. But if you do push past that and you go out for a walk, I guarantee you don't regret it.
No.
It's just one of those things that always makes you feel better. And whatever it is you're doing, even if you're in like a big work creative zone, having a break and going for a walk is always going to help. Because you can only work and focus for so long, and you do need to take a break. And I mean, we might as well just get into that now. So walking, and I think especially when it's combined with nasal breathing, which is obviously the natural way that we would walk. There's humans and all other animals don't naturally mouth breathe.
Except for dogs.
No, they pant. That's their temperature regulation.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. They have to do that for temperature regulation, but otherwise they nose breathe.
Oh, wow. So it's only when they're...
It's only when they're hot and they need
energy,
yeah. So humans are the only animal that can sweat.
Yeah.
And whereas other animals temperature regulate through panting and other things. But otherwise it's nasal breathing.
No, gotcha. I'm proven wrong.
Fun fact. And nasal breathing is we had a whole podcast on breath, so check out that one. But it's the way to breathe, basically, unless you're extremely exerted and you just have to gulp in air. But for the most part, especially for walking, nasal breathing is where it's at. And walking, especially when combined with nasal breathing, it can be very, very very good for our physiology and our psychology. And there's good research behind this, but if you think about about walking, it's basically a full body movement, and it can become quite a full body moving meditation. So there's, like I said, there's all these parts working in tandem, and I mentioned hips, ankles, and feet and toes, but obviously your arms are involved. And also, especially if you're walking outside, then your head, regardless of where you're walking, you have to stabilize your head on your neck, and have your trunk upright and all of that. So that in itself is a movement. But also if you're walking outside, and especially in nature, then you're constantly scanning the surroundings to see where you're walking, glancing down to check whether there's any obstacles in the way, and
or sticks.
Yeah. Too soon.
Too easy.
So your whole body is getting involved, and your senses are enhanced because you need to stay safe in the environment that you're walking in. And again, back to evolutionarily speaking, then you can't afford to be out of the zone. You can't afford to be like completely tuned out in a natural environment, because could be a predator at any point. And so meditation, that moving meditation, is really our natural state of being, is of full presence in the moment, tuned into your senses and what is in your environment and what's in your surroundings. That's our natural state. And this is why meditation is so good for us, is because we're actually having a little bit of time that we're actually putting ourselves back in that present moment awareness state. Well, it's part of why it's so good for us. And when you combine that present moment awareness with walking, then you get an ultimate combo of physiological, psychological, physical and mental benefits.
And I guess that's one of the benefits of barefoot walking is it forces you into that state even more. And I know that's one of the things that people often ask us is, but don't you step on glass or in dog poo? And it's like, well, I don't, because I'm present in the moment and I'm aware of my surroundings. And if there's glass up ahead, I'll have seen it before I stand on it. And it's not a matter of staring down at the ground, but it's using your peripherals and just being aware and being present. And I think that's where shoes make us less present, in that walking motion, is because we don't have to worry about what's beneath our feet.
Yeah.
And then the modern world is so sanitized that we don't have to worry about predators either. So we can walk aimlessly with our headphones in and get hit by a car as we cross the road because we're not paying attention.
Yeah, you're just tuned out. Your feet are protected.
Complete autopilot.
Yeah, and obviously, there's a role for foot protection. Of course. But you're right. And the only time that I stepped on glass, I always say this in my workshops, and usually when the question comes up, but the only time I've stepped on glass has been once in my 3 or 4 years of walking on the streets barefoot, was when I was looking at my phone. Strolling along, whipped out, saw my phone, replying to a text, and then boom, there I go. And then I was like, in one sense, like, yeah, damn, I stepped on glass. But in the other sense, it was like, well, that's a sign. Don't be on your phone while you're walking. When just be present in what you're doing, and you don't. Obviously, there's still going to be risks. You can't avoid all injuries and occurrences. But if you're careful enough, then nothing good or bad will ever happen to you. So
yeah, it's really
you gotta have a little bit of risk in life, and there's a lot to be said about risk. And we talked about that in the Play podcast. And when it comes to flow, is risk actually makes things more fun and makes you more. It taps you into flow more, into a flow state, which is that state of optimal performance. Because when something's risky, I guess it just does force, like you said, it forces more presence. And being barefoot is still very low risk.
Very, yeah.
If you're present.
Yeah.
It's a tool for getting into that. But I guess the other thing is walking and especially nasal breathing also activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest nervous system, which is pretty much the opposite of what most people are in, which is fight or flight, sympathetic activation. And again, we talked about all of this on the stress and the breath podcast. But again, that is the state that we should be in most of the time. We need stress to grow. Basically, stress is a helpful thing in certain contexts and in certain dosages. But if we're constantly in that sympathetic activation where it's fight or flight, which a lot of people are due to work and family and all of these stresses in our life, then it takes a big toll on us, and it actually does increase risk of disease and inflammation and everything. And there's more nuance to that. But
is that the same as running, or is it walking in particular that activates?
Running would be more the sympathetic.
Yeah.
Because you can imagine walking is just a very gentle rhythm. Like, obviously running is rhythmic as well, but it's more about intensity. So running, you're more likely to be running from something, like a predator, or running at something and trying to hunt something. And either way, you need the stress chemicals to increase your performance in those states.
Yeah, I guess I just asked because I know a lot of people in their stressed out lives, particularly people who maybe necessarily shouldn't be running, work, and then their exercise is to either jump on a treadmill or to hit the pavement and burn themselves out on a run. And I just wonder how beneficial that really is if they could just be going for, like you said, a walk with nasal breathing and getting into that parasympathetic state.
Yeah, I mean, it does all come down to context, because that person might be increasing their resilience to stress by running, and that it all comes down to how well they recover after that run. So like you said, if someone's super stressed, they're not sleeping well, they're not getting good nutrition, and they're trying to burn themselves with running every day, then that's not going to be good. But if they're using running as a tool to really push their resilience, and then they're recovering well with good nutrition, good sleep, good hydration, and they're balancing it out with a good amount of walking, then it could be great for them. So
yeah, of course.
Context dependent, but absolutely. In general, society does focus a lot on that. Let's just work. Let's go to work. We wake up early. We run. We go to work. We work all day, and we go home. We go to the all this, and it's like you do just need to take some time to chill out and go for a walk sometimes. And like we said, you never feel bad after a walk. You always feel better. And on that note, you don't have to run.
Yeah.
Running can be great in certain contexts, but you do have to walk.
And even jogging. I mean,
when just walk. If you're going to jog, just
some people we do see jogging, it's just walk.
Yeah. Like it'd be more beneficial. It's less, less
impact on the body as well.
On the joints, which is clearly what these people need, because they are. You can sort of tell when someone is sedentary. They don't have a good running pattern. They haven't trained running. They clearly don't have don't have optimal mobility in their joints, and they're just trying to flog themselves through this run
for weight loss gains.
Yeah,
for a lot of it is for appearance.
Yeah, and for the most part, they would get all of, if not more, benefit from walking.
Yeah.
So we do know, and we've explored this before, the brain works best with movement and vestibular activation. So walking is pretty much ideal for both. Like we said, it does take a good amount of stability and balance to stay upright and walk. And especially if you do it in non-linear environments, so in natural environments, really, where there's a lot of variation, then you're getting a lot of that vestibular activation and balance training. And so, like we've talked about in the balance podcast, there's the mixture between visual, somatosensory, and vestibular inputs that then give us that representation of where we are in space. And so the activation of that is very, very good for our brain. And actually, they've different areas of the brain, but one in particular is the hippocampus, which is involved in learning, memory, and cognition and mood, and is also involved in regulating the stress response. And they've done this study on the brain of people in their early 70s, and he talks about this in the book as well. And so they split it was 120 people. They split it up into two groups, and they tracked them over a year. And they took the first group, they took walking 3 times a week, and then the second group, they just didn't change anything about their lifestyle. And I think the walk was only about a couple of kilometers, so not a massive walk, but they found significant benefits. So first of all, the volume and the function of the hippocampus was increased, which meant that their learning and memory got better. And on cognitive tests, they started performing like someone who was 4 years younger than them, 4 or 5 years younger than them.
Wow.
So it literally reverses the functional aging of the brain. And they also found increased levels of BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Bit of a mouthful, but it's basically a protein in the brain that supports nerve cell growth and synaptic connections, so neural cell connections and neuroplasticity. And that is obviously very important for brain health and brain function. And yeah, I just thought that was really cool. Like we've used the quote in the past that you don't get old because you don't stop playing because you get old because you stop playing. And this guy used the same quote, but for walking.
Yeah, of course. Because
most people sort of do just tend at, people think, oh, I'm getting old, and so I just don't do as much activity. But it's like, no, you're getting old because you don't do as much activity.
Yeah.
And you see people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, 100s who have continued walking, and they're in really, really great shape. And surprise, surprise, they can still walk because they never stopped walking.
Yeah.
And this is a very, very important thing. And it's not only for body health, but brain health as well.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, we've talked about it a lot before, but falls are such a major driver behind, the death of older people. And if you keep walking and you maintain that balance and that stability, then, yeah, it makes sense that you'd live longer.
Yeah. Actually, on that as well, in our workshops, we talk about we go through the sit and rise test, and I think we talked about it in the ground living podcast. And that is a test of just how well you can get up and down off the ground without using your hands, and how correlated that is with all-cause mortality. But also, walking speed is a very good indicator of all-cause mortality as well. So the slower you walk and the less balanced you are while you're walking, the more likely you are to die in the near future, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so two very, very simple things: your ability to get up and down off the ground and your ability to walk with speed and confidence, two of the biggest indicators of your overall health, which is really cool. And they're very,
really
very
cool.
simple things to test.
Yeah. Very simple things to test and very simple things to stay on top of.
Especially if you start now.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. But it is never too late. That's a very key message that we want to get across in all our podcasts, is it's never too late to start working on something. The other thing that was interesting that he mentioned is around depression. So major depressive disorder has a lifetime prevalence of 10% apparently, which is huge. So 10% of the population will experience major depressive disorder at some point.
And I would be surprised if that's even...
It might be climbing.
Yeah.
Well, it is climbing.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah. But that's major depressive disorder. Obviously,
major, right.
There's other... it's a spectrum. There's other mental health issues and so on. But there was an Australian study on 35,000 people that tracked them over a number of years. And they basically tried to correlate walking volume, how much someone walked, and their risk of getting major depressive disorder. Yeah. Major depression, we'll call that, because less of a mouthful. But basically what they found in that study is that walking volume is negatively correlated or inversely correlated with risk of developing major depression. So it's a very key thing that you can do to avoid getting major depression, is increasing your walking volume.
Is that, obviously plenty of factors would go into that, but you'd think a big driver of that could be the meditative state that we sort of spoke about, that good mental health state that you get in the parasympathetic.
Yeah, that'd be huge. And plus all the impacts on mood and cognition and all of that, and
physically.
Yeah, and creativity, and you are more creative. Your mood is better. Your stress response is more regulated when you're walking, and it's also a really good way to connect socially as well, and that is obviously very protective for mental health conditions, which we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, it can just be, walking can be such an amazing time to either clear the mind, get into that meditative zone, or you can tap into that creative zone. If you've got a problem you need to solve, then taking a walk can be the best thing you can do to do that. Like I'm sure most people have had an experience where they've just been sitting at a computer, like trying to figure something out with their study or assignment or whatever. And then it's like, I just need to take a break, go for a walk, or go and do something, go some kind of movement. And you come back and then you've got a fresh mind, and you can, or you even on the walk, you even figure out, I should have been thinking about it like this.
It's a reset button.
Yeah, and there's a few reasons for that, but really, when you get down to it, the brain wasn't made to function sedentary. We're made to function moving, or at least with a lot of movement in our daily lives. And when you move, there's probably a million different factors that go into why movement helps the brain, but all we just know for certain that the brain functions optimally with movement, and walking should be the movement we do the most of.
Yeah.
And many of history's greatest thinkers and writers and philosophers all sort of G up walking as well. Like, they all credit walking to be a major part of their routine. People like Henry David Thoreau and Thomas Jefferson and Immanuel Kant and Stephen King, all of these big names, they all talk about their practice of walking and how much it helps their creativity and their writing flow and all of this. So don't believe us, just
believe them.
Yeah, believe them. And try it for yourself. So we will get into some ways to incorporate and facilitate more walking in your life, but just to touch on a point we mentioned just before, is that walking can be a really amazing tool for building social connections. And like we said, that's exactly how it would have been used and experienced historically, is walking together with a group somewhere, whether it's hunting or foraging or migrating or whatever. Then you're usually doing it obviously with your tribe, and you're making connections along that walk. It's not like running, where running is kind of,
I mean, people give it a crack.
Yeah, we're walking. Mac and I do our walks along the river, and we're having a leisurely stroll. Like, we keep a decent pace, but we're not there to burn cows.
We're there to chat.
And we have great chats on our walks. It's one of our favorite times of the day. I've been really missing it with this foot lately, but it's one of our favorite times of the day to just stroll along the river, have a chat, and nod our heads at the regulars, and make fun of people who are running funny. Not really, but kind of. But we see people that are running along, and they're trying to talk, and they're trying to have a full conversation while they're running. Yeah. And they're going, yeah, and then this happened, and I went along to this place, and it's like, it's painful to listen to, and I know it's painful to do as well, because I've tried to talk to people on a run.
Me too.
You just want to tune out, and that's not what running's for. Running is for getting the hell away from something, or persistence hunting and running down an animal, but you're not having a conversation while you're running. That's not the idea.
No.
You can have a full conversation while you're walking, and you can even maintain nasal breathing for the most part. Obviously, talking itself involves mouth breathing, but because it's a conversation, you should be able to maintain a level of nasal breathing as well.
And because it's so universal as well, I mean, it's something that has brought a lot of people together. Even in the modern day, with social media groups and online walking groups, and I know my mother has been involved in a walking or a running group, and just that whole idea of strangers coming together, because it's something that most of us can do. And and for people who are lonely, or who don't necessarily, maybe they move somewhere and they don't have friends, or they want to make new connections, it is such an easy way for people to connect, because
for sure
it's something that everyone can do.
It's very universal, and humans do connect through movement in general, but walking is such a big one, and even bigger on that is our human tendency to march. If there's a shared, he mentions this in the book as well, and a shared goal or a shared mission to make some kind of political or legal change will often result in a march. So people get together and march in the streets as a show of camaraderie and a show of, what's the word?
Unity, really.
Yeah, unity, yeah. And you march along the street, and obviously there's fun runs and stuff to raise stuff for charity, but there's something really significant about people walking together.
Yeah, I like with my old job, we'd often cover marches, and it was it was something that I'd never been personally involved with, but seeing a group of people together, all for the same mission, and then getting to meet individuals on that march and getting to hear why they're doing what they're doing, and it's a powerful thing, and it makes a bloody impact. Like, it really makes a statement. And I mean, we saw it in America with the riots not too long ago, peaceful marches, and the uproar that caused. So it really can make a difference,
for sure. And whether it's a march or just walking with your friend or with a group, anywhere, you do get this shared sense of progress somehow. Even if you're just going for an quote unquote aimless walk or hike, like there's no point to it per se, but you get this feeling of like, sweet, we got to our destination, like,
accomplished.
Like we went for a hike with the foot nerds in Melbourne, and it was just a meander through the Dandenongs, really, but there was a hill at the end, and we got up to the hill, and then Andy was like, should we go one more lap? And we're like, all right. And then we went another lap, which was a different way, and then ended up at the top of the hill, and we did it all barefoot, which was really nice. And then at the top of the hill, we're like, sweet, let's take a photo. We grouped together, it's like this shared accomplishment of like, sweet, we did that walk.
Yeah, yeah.
And so there is something special in that. And walking also syncs you up, like, even if you're not chatting, sort of companionable silence, and they've found that your gait pattern and your rhythm starts to sync up, and it's cool to watch. It's cool to watch, and it's also interesting to observe what happens if someone sort of persistently starts walking faster than you. If you're walking with someone, like I'm quite a fast walker, and I've experienced many times walking with someone, and they're like, "Can you slow down?" Like,
it's kind of
rude.
Yeah.
It is kind of rude to walk.
You're just trying to show how long you'll live.
Yeah, true. Always just flaunting it. But it's kind of aggressive to like walk faster than the person you're walking with, and sometimes I just don't notice. But then when someone says it, I'm like, oh yeah, whoops, like I have to like consciously work on slowing down. But at the same time, I think I've found that happens when I'm tuning out of a conversation, or I'm not as interested in what's happening, or maybe not as interested in the person. You almost subconsciously walk ahead of them.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. I'm trying to think of specific situations now, but it doesn't matter. But either way, it's cool how the body syncs up with someone else.
Yeah, for sure.
And you don't have to be talking.
No.
You can just be walking together, and that's that really shared sense of, well, just a connection. And
I wonder if that happens the same with animals, with dogs, with humans walking with dogs. I'll have to take note of it next time I'm walking, whether a really present animal and dog are in sync.
Maybe. The dogs would be going wild with all the smells, though. Probably.
Yeah, true. They're not thinking of what their owner's doing with their gait pattern.
Yeah, it's probably more of a human thing, but I don't know. We should look into it. If anyone knows.
Not our dog. Our dog is not thinking of buddy. Not my dog.
Yeah.
Bentley would be looking for food.
Yeah, and maybe a very well-trained dog who is very connected with their human. But it's interesting food for thought. But yeah, so social walking is a really great way to build connection, and obviously the extreme importance of having a tribe and a community that is so protective against all of these lifestyle and chronic diseases. So there's that. And he also talks about in the book, like, when you think about a city, its walkability is a huge part of its attractiveness. Hey, like the cities that are most walkable,
the most livable cities,
have great areas to walk. And the river, the expressway along the river, is a good example. That gets so much use because you don't have to dodge cars, and you don't have to wait at lights, and you don't have to, you've got this nice view along the river. And heaps of people walk on it. Like in the morning and the afternoon, there's heaps of people walking. And so, people like walking, but it's got to be walkable. Whereas I've stayed in certain parts of cities that are just boring old like just streets, and it's cars and it's lights and it's, it's not very it's not very conducive to wanting to go for a walk. And so having areas where, or at least finding areas and preferably living in areas that are walkable, can make a huge difference to how much you walk as well.
Huge. I mean, and we're very spoiled that we live very close to the coast here, but that is one of the biggest boons of a coast lifestyle, is being able to walk along the beach.
Waterfront. Yeah, exactly. And I like this, what he uses an acronym, Shane O'Mara, he uses an acronym which is EASE. So walking environment. So the idea is, for any urban or town planners out there, then for the health of our bodies and for our environment, it's very important that we facilitate walking. And so if you have environments that are easy, so walking should be easy, obviously accessible. So, you don't want to exclude people who can't walk. Obviously, if we can walk, we want to do as much as we can, but obviously there are those who can't walk for whatever reason, whether they're in a wheelchair. So accessibility is important, and also just accessibility for walkers too, and safety. And so, having areas where there aren't like the expressway, where there's not so many cars or zero cars, and just a few, aggressive cyclists here and there, but and enjoyable. So not like big thoroughfares of cars and trucks and all of that. Like, even the river is right next to a main road, Coronation Drive, but it's removed enough that you can hear it, but it's not like in your face, and you're not smelling the fumes, and it's down a bit and all of that. So it's cool things to either, if you are an urban or town planner, you can think about that, which you may already be thinking about. Or if you're looking to move places or move houses or move to a new area, then really looking for something that is walkable if you can, because that will make a huge difference to how much you walk, and therefore how healthy you are, and how your quality of life in the long run.
It's a simple little hack.
Yeah. See, and that's what we talk about in habitat. Like, your habitat and your environment makes a huge difference to what you're able to, or what you're likely to do.
Yeah.
You can always work against or work with whatever habitat you're in, but
if you place yourself
helps
somewhere, it's going to make it a lot easier.
Or if you just have to live where you're living, which is like, brick and mortar and concrete and everywhere, and cars everywhere, then just try and drive somewhere, regularly for a nature walk, or, find somewhere that you're like, oh, that's a good place to walk, and just go there regularly, because it's kind of one of those non-negotiables.
Yeah, for sure.
You use it or lose it. And it might take years and years to lose it, but you'll wish you hadn't.
That's the one thing you don't want to lose.
Yeah. So, we sort of touched on a bunch of things already throughout the podcast, but we'll just wrap up with incorporating and facilitating more walking in your daily life. So we obviously talked about our daily routine of having a walk, and really walking is the ideal movement to start your day, whether that's solo or with a friend or a group of people.
Or to end your day.
To end your day. Or both, preferably.
Or during the day, or to break it up.
Yeah, actually, the more times during the day.
The Holy Trinity.
The better. The Holy Trinity, yeah. And breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So, whether by yourself or with a group or just with your partner or a friend, it is, it's either really good for social connection or it's really good for solitude and just working things out and just being with yourself. So either way, it's a win-win. But daily routine, some kind of daily routine, preferably 3 times a day, or at least 1 time a day, where you just get some steps in. There's a whole thing about 10,000 steps, and I think there's not actually good research to show you have to have 10,000 steps, but it's a good sort of ballpark to show, okay, you've done a good amount of walking today. If you've done 100 steps in a day, then it's a real problem. If you've done 8,000 or you've done 12,000, generally the more the better, as long as your feet and body can handle it. But just aim for, a good few walks, and also a regular long walk, like hour or 2 or 3, or a hike, something like that, to really push the limits and just immerse a bit more in the walk.
Yeah.
And you can listen to podcasts. Like, I've found a lot of value in listening to podcasts on walks in throughout my life. Or lately, obviously you and I go for a walk, so we don't listen to potties, but we chat. Or, if I go for a walk in the arvo, then sometimes just not listening to anything. Or listening to music can be good too.
Yeah.
Or just being alone with your thoughts and the sounds of the river and all of that.
Yeah.
So, few options there for a daily routine. Obviously, walking to work or to the shops is a cool option because it's just bang for your buck. You're going to go to those places anyway. And if you can walk there, that's a huge bonus. Or if you can drive part of the way and then walk part of the way,
I think, I was going to say it's also, it's little things, but when you do go to the shops or you go to the markets or you go to a concert and you're looking for that park that is the prime park right out the front, maybe settle for one that's a few blocks away or, and do make that walk or take the stairs if there's an elevator. It's just little things that you can do to achieve. Yeah.
Yeah. It feels like a bit of a cop-out, that whole advice, but it really isn't, because if you add up all of those little things over years, it does make a big difference to your overall volume. And most people listening to this are probably already of that mindset and they take the stairs instead of the elevator and all of that. But it's just good to keep in mind that it is an option to park further away and do a bit of a loaded carry if you've got some groceries. You get extra bonuses, and it's just good to remember that these are options. And it's even good for me to remind myself too. Sometimes I get caught up in the busyness of the day and I just want to get in and out of the shops, but I always find if it's a Sunday morning and we can walk to Milton Markets, or if we go to Northey Street, then there's usually some level of walking involved, especially at Northey Street with the parking situation there. It's just good to find ways to incorporate that into activities that you're already doing, because you're going to do them anyway. If you're going to go to the shops or work, then you might as well walk a bit. I think I just added a little thing in here talking about strengthening and mobilizing key areas, because in one sense, if you've got, like I said, if you've got foot pain or you've got some kind of pain, you're not going to be doing as much walking as you could or should. And that's a real problem. So obviously there's a lot of factors that come into pain, and it's not all about strength and mobility. But when we talk about function, then strength and mobility are huge. Strength and flexibility and control. And so we don't have to go into how to do that for every area, but first of all, if you are in pain, finding someone that you trust to help guide you out of it, or at least finding some kind of strengthening program that is progressive, that can help improve your function. Often when your function improves, then pain will improve, not always, but either way, you want to improve your function. So, get started on something like that, and then also look into, obviously, other ways of resolving pain. And most people who are in pain have already looked at a bunch, but, feel free to get in touch with us if you are struggling with something, especially foot, knee, hip, back related. We've got a really good network of practitioners in Australia now who, and the world, but who are very keen and willing to help with those kinds of things. But yeah, the other thing that it does, strengthening and mobilizing key areas, like we talked about, if your hip extension is limited from so much sitting, or if your ankle dorsiflexion is limited from so much shoes, then you're not going to have an efficient pattern. So if you actually, walking is obviously a good way to help increase that, but sometimes it can be a great thing to really target those areas with some strength and mobility so that you can then increase your efficiency. But they go hand in hand. I've found actually walking can be one of the best ways to mobilize my hip flexors, as long as you do it with the right intent and you focus on that full hip extension and everything. Yeah. Because you can walk, you can just meander and stroll, or you can walk where you're really like powering along and you're pushing off and you really feel your hip flexors activating going and glutes, and by the end of it, your whole, like, you come home. Have you experienced that, where you come home from like a fast, powerful walk, and your whole body's like twitching? Yeah. It's like those central pattern generators, like, oh, I've stopped walking. I was in such a zone.
Keep going. What are you doing?
So just strengthening, mobilizing key areas. Walking in nature, like we've talked about, obviously that you get all of these extra benefits of the adapting to the ground and the textures on the feet, and then obviously the more or the less tangible benefits maybe of the smells and the sights and the sounds and all of these parts of nature that are very, very beneficial and have been proven to be very beneficial for inflammation and stress and all of these things that tend to get out of hand. And, you know, we're not in a natural environment anymore. Most people are in the concrete jungle, and it's a very different environment to nature. And there are benefits to being in the concrete jungle, such as increased safety in many ways. But we do have to acknowledge that we are part of nature, and we have to spend time in nature to be healthy. And so walking or hiking in nature, especially with a group, or a partner or a friend, can be such an amazing thing to do. And one of those things that you probably won't fit in every day, but, you know, once a week or once a fortnight or just regularly is a really, really important thing to think about and plan around. And you get the benefit of the grounding and earthing as well.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. If you go barefoot or if you wear earthing shoes. Yeah. Still got to test out those earth runners. And then lastly, I mean, this has kind of been the theme of the whole podcast, but just gratitude for your ability to walk and really tapping into that appreciation every time you walk, and every time you think about going for a walk and you're not sure if you want to, just go, man, I'm so grateful that I can walk.
Yeah.
And acknowledging that and being like, yeah, I can walk. If you can, you should, basically.
Yeah.
You know, you do lose a lot of independence if you lose your ability to walk, and quality of life goes down. And so, you know, really acknowledging it and appreciating it while you can will also help keep that ability around for as long as possible. And you really don't have to lose the ability to walk. People sort of see it as some natural progression, and, you know, you're just going to get a walking stick and then a 4-wheeler walker and then you're in a wheelchair. It's like, no, just keep walking, and you shouldn't there's really no reason to lose that ability. Yeah. Obviously you slow down a bit as you get older, but, you know, it's not a natural progression to lose your ability to walk. But yeah, I mean, in that sense, it is really, it's a duty to yourself and to your family and to your community and to the earth to walk as much as you can. Again, we're not all perfect. You know, Mac and I can definitely walk more, that's for sure. For sure. But it's taken steps in the right direction, pun intended. And that's probably a good place to wrap it up. All it takes is the first step. We should probably go for a walk. Yeah, we really should actually. We've been sitting down too long. On the ground, though, so it doesn't count. But yeah, so thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll I imagine we'll also do a podcast on running at some point, but that'll probably be down the road when we have both been practicing a bit more running, especially after this foot heals up properly or completely. And
next week we'll have the foot nerd chats will start.
Yeah, it'll start rolling those out. So next week will be Andy, which is going to be more about feet and footwear.
Andy Bryant,
podiatry.
Yes, podiatrist.
Yes, the famous Andy Bryant.
He's gonna love you said that.
Love you, Andy. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next week.
See you guys.